Hey guys, we time. I think it's time. Is everyone getting me right? Tell me if you're getting me so that I start. Okay, so I'll start. I see that we are already 6 minutes in. Now, what you're going to talk about is not the normal forms that you're used to, just the text fields and whatnot. We want to get a bit deeper so that we can use any other form of input provided by Flutter to make sure that we can get in all kinds of input apart from just text. Most tutorials that you see online, people are giving you how to use forms. You're just getting how to use text fields, password input and whatnot. We want to go a bit deeper and see how we can make any other form of input, like let's say a switch, a date picker, or even filter chips or choice chips, to turn them into form inputs. So here what we have is a very simple form which has a text field. Now we can add a few more types of input so that we can try and experiment on them. So I'll try having a switch where we'll have the value as false at the beginning. Then a switch will also require that we have an unchanged. So we'll have the new value here. Using we can declare here a variable that will hold our student. Be able to update our list. If anyone doesn't remember, let me know. We have probably here the top sheet with the value of what's selected by the user. So we'll also make sure that our switch gets its value from switch input. Okay, we can also include another kind of input, which is we can try checkbox. Here that will hold our value for the checkbox. So with that, we are ready to get started. Now what Flutter provides is a range of form inputs, which include a text field, drop down, switch, checkbox, date pickers, time pickers, switch we mentioned, so that is filter chips and choice chips. So these are the different types of inputs that we can put in. But the biggest problem if you are using such kinds of input is how to manage validation apart from just the text field, which offers validation very easily. We'll have validation for something like say a checkbox, where we want to make sure that every user will have to say, if you are having terms and conditions, every user can has to enable or accept the terms and conditions before you go ahead. So how do you validate such a thing as a checkbox? So here we have a checkbox input, and obviously on changed we are supposed to set the state of our input. So we'll just get the value from whatever is given to us here, and use it as our checkbox input. So we'll set the value there. Sorry, set state. Checkbox first maybe. Okay. So there we have it. We have a checkbox that can accept user input. But the question is, how do we validate these other types of input apart from the text field which we have up there? which offers a very easy way. So to manage such kinds of problems in Flutter where you have you can't validate, you can't save the input. Let's say for a switch input, we are using just the manual way, but we would want to be able to manage the state of the form as a whole, and also we want consistency on our form. There are different types of input, but they look different. So what we want to have is a type of form which looks consistent in terms of styling. So what to do here is we put number one, we put this inside in an input decoration. So input also it's an input decorator, which is a widget. With its child as the checkbox, which we want now to turn into a normal form input. Now, an input decorator will require that we have decoration. Decoration is the one that will enable us, let's say for the example of a text field, we have input decoration, which will have our label text, which will be showing to enable the user understand what kind of input is required there. So here we have decoration as an attribute. Decoration takes in an object of input decoration. So there's a small difference between a decorator and decoration. Decoration is just a class that will enable us to add input to add styling onto the field. So it uses decorated pattern where we can be able to add functionality to the input without affecting the input itself. So this is where we'll put our label text saying that this will show us this will show the user what kind of input is required. So label text here will say, let's say, accept terms and conditions. So you'll notice that when we immediately put text decoration, the styling of this checkbox looks a bit similar to the text input. So, but this is just helping us with styling. So remember, we had 3 problems to solve. Number one is validation for the types of input that are not the text field, which are the normal kinds of input. The second the second problem we are trying to solve is consistency. So we want all our inputs to be consistent, to look similar. So this is the problem that we've solved right now. And then the last problem is just getting the value of the form, so that we can send it to a backend or whatever we want to do with it. So for us to manage the form, there is a field that is named there's a widget named form field, which we will wrap our input into, so that it can be managed as part of the form. So here we will wrap this widget inside the form field. Only I could type form field. So form field does not take a child, it takes a builder. So the builder will take in a field, which is a field of the form, so which is a form field. So it will take in its state. So remember that a form field is usually used to manage the state of a field within a form. So now that we have an input and we have a form field, so that will be our field. Usually a form field is usually typed. So basically here, since a checkbox input accepts input in form of Boolean, so that will be our type of input here. So that would mean that the form, the state being collected, the value, and also we will have access to the error. This is where we can input the error that based on validation, the error that will be shown to the user. So here we will have an error text, which we will just gather the error from the field itself. So field dot error text. So that is where we will get the error in case the user enters a wrong input. So another thing, now that we've set an error text, we can now set validation for the form. So validator, it will take in a function that we will give you our value, which is let's call it our value candidate. So the value that we want to check whether it's valid or not. So here we'll say, now this is a terms and conditions page, a terms and conditions input. So what we'll have is so for a terms and conditions input, we will have our validator to say the terms and conditions must be true. So that means that we'll just check if the value candidate is equal to true, then we will return our error, which we will state that you must accept terms and conditions. Let's see. And also, in case nothing goes wrong, the input validator must return a null. So we will just have null here in case validation fails. Oh, sorry. Now, how will we be able to validate this checkbox of ours? The first thing we do is we wrap the whole area that we're going to put our form fields. We wrap it in a form, which is another kind of widget. A form will just help us manage the whole kinds of input as the whole inputs as a single entity. So it will make it easy for us to collect the value to validate at once. Instead of validating each field one at a time, we can validate the whole thing once. So we will wrap this with our form. So for us to get the state of the form, we must define a global key that we will attach to the form so that we can access its state. So we will declare a global key here, and a global key must be typed. If you want to be able to get things like intelligence, you'll type the global key so that you know which kinds of state you're dealing with. So which will be just form state. We will name our global key form key, which is of, we'll just insert here, so we'll have a global key here. After defining our global key, we come and attach it to the form so that it gets attached to the state of the form. Now, for this example, we're just starting with a checkbox, but it will apply to any kind of input that you want to deal with. So when the input changes, when the input for the form changes, we want to update the value of our field, or our field here. So we want this field value to change whenever someone changes the text box. So what we'll do is that we'll have our field and we'll notify the change. So did change, and we'll put the new value that comes in. And also remember that we just used set here as an example when we are starting. But since we are managing this using the form, we can remove the set state. And instead of using checkbox input, we can use the field value. Or if the field value is not defined, we will just use false, so that since a checkbox must take in a boolean and not null. So that's what we'll do. You'll see that it still works the same way if we do that. So our checkbox will be able to work just as normal. So we've defined a form field. We've defined our field that we want to collect data from, and we've defined our global key for the form. Now, how do we validate the whole form, or how do we save the form? So for us to do that, we're going to define another, now our button that will trigger the saving and the validation of the form. So here we'll just declare a raised button with the child text of submit. And when on pressed, now since we have our handle for the form is the form key, we will use the form key, then get the current state of the key of the form. Since a form is a stateful widget, then we'll run validate. So you'll notice that when I run let's first compile. And try to submit. Oh, sorry. So we were supposed to set if it's not true, so that if the user has not checked the terms and conditions, we will be able to tell them that they must accept. So after that, we submit, and you'll notice that now our form will be able to validate and see that the user has actually checked the terms and conditions. So if you check the terms and conditions, it will accept the input. So basically, as long as we don't have validation errors, then that means it's okay. Now you'll notice that here I used a text field. So a text field is just like a checkbox without the form field. Since it will be able to collect input, but validation and such form utilities like validation and saving will not be there. So what we need to do for our text field up here is we'll use a text form field, which is just a text field with the form field as part of its definition in the widget. So when we set that, we'll be able to do validation for this for the form. So let's say we are entering the, let's just use the name instead of the first name. So a validation function will take in the value that we want to validate, which is actually not the value of the field, but let's call it a value candidate, since that is the value we want to validate. So let's say we want this user not to have an empty field for a name. So what we'll do, number one, we will return null just to make sure that oh sorry, it's validator, not validation. So number one, we may want to check if the user has entered I see someone asking about a key. The key will help us access the full form at once. If you are saying that we should be using a text editing controller, but a text editing controller that we have to manage each text field manually. And remember, we are using also a checkbox. A checkbox does not have a text editing controller, so that's why we are using a form field. That's why you are using a key, so that you can access the whole field at once. So that is one way of going about it. Text editing controller, I think it's just because if you want to access or you want to change the value. Otherwise, I don't see the need for having a text editing controller. So let's continue with our validation. So we will check our value candidate. We'll make sure that it's not null. So basically, if it's null or the value candidate is empty, if it's either null or empty, then we will return our error, which will say, let's say, please enter your name. And then also we may want to, let's say we have two validations to check. Number one, let's say we want to make sure that a user has entered a value there, and also let's say if the length is, let's say, over 3 characters. So that we'll just add another validation function here. So we'll say if it's not equal to null and the length is less than 3. This is just an example of a validation we want to put in. So we'll say if that is the case, then we will tell our user that name must be more than 3 characters long. So basically, this is the way a validator function works. It takes in the value and it returns null if you don't have any error, and returns a string if you have an error. So that is how we will handle it. So this is also another input that we can change over to be a form field. So it's just as easy as we will repeat the whole process, putting an input field, an input decorator, sorry, decoration, which is a widget, and it will take in a decorator, which is of type input decorator. So the label text I keep switching these two. So this is supposed to be a text field decorator, not decoration. The widget is supposed to be a decorator, and now here it's supposed to be a decoration. Sorry for the mix-up. So our label text will be some kind of preference. You can so this one becomes decoration again. So here we'll just put switch, it's not now that you don't have anything to put there. So that will turn again our switch into a decorator. That it looks a bit funny, so we'll just put it inside a row. Let's just copy this validation and see how it's supposed to work. So we'll just say it's also supposed to be required to be true. So we'll wrap it with the form field. And our form field will have, we'll just put in our validator there. Then remember that we are supposed to use a builder here, since the form field does not take in a child, but it takes builder. So our builder will be a form field, which will be our field. So you notice that we put here the same validator as the checkbox. So let's just try to build and see if we have a problem. Say we try to submit. The switch does not have any error. The reason is because in our decoration, we are also supposed to take in the error of that field and show it in our input decoration. So what we'll do here, we'll just write error text, which will come from the field that we have defined here. And remember, we said that form fields are usually typed just to make sure that you are getting exactly what you want from the user. So we'll say field dot error text. So we've changed two kinds of input into form fields apart from the normal text field that we have on top. We can be able to remember, we've also forgotten to, so what you're going to have here, we must notify the field of the changes in the switch. So that is something that usually most people forget. So if you don't do that, then it will not be able to validate or accept the change. So basically, you'll not be able to save or validate. So we notify the field that the value has changed. So we call field.didChange, and we supply the value that the new value that is supposed to be taken in. Also to make sure that we are up to date, we also are supposed to use a field to use our field value. So, or if it's empty, then we can just say it's false. So up to where we've reached, there are three things that you're supposed to have noted. That if you want to manage the form as a whole, this is just to Patrick Waweru, who has asked about text editing controller. Text editing controller is just one if you want to control the forms. I think for me, my preference would be using a key. Keys are easier to manage, and if you don't want fine-grained control, text editing controller will enable you to say change the value from outside. If you want to change the value that the user has entered, let's say in the text editing controller, without the user's input, you want to programmatically change the value, then in that case you will need a controller. Else, I don't think you need a controller. You can work with fields and you'll be okay. So we've been able to validate our field and to make sure that our fields are consistent with the styling of the form. So if we look at this, these fields look the same. It is not as initially it was, where the switch and the checkbox were looking a bit different. So you actually don't have to use the text editing controller. In fact, for the case of switch and checkbox, it doesn't make a lot of sense. The way it looks, it is on a different line, and it's just on its own. So what we'll do to make things easier, let's say for the switch, we can instead of using label text, which looks a bit weird in this case, we can just use normal text. And let's say for this field we want someone to subscribe to our mailing list. I think we've found a better use for our switch. So for that case, let's have it build, then we can put spaces between. So main axis alignment. So we'll have main axis alignment. That space between, so that we separate the two. But you may want also to have the same experience you're having, where the label text, the color of the label text also changes when the value, when we have an error. So what we'll have in our text, since we have access to the field and we can know whether the field has an error or not, we will put styling here, which would be a text style. And we can say the color will be, we will check the field now. If the field has an error, then we can use our material, we can use our theme, of context dot error color, so that it gets the error color of from our material theme. Else we will use let's say black. So that will be that. So basically you don't have to use a label text. You can just define your own text, as long as you may want it to match the validation status. So you'll notice that our custom text, our custom label also changes color when there's an error, and then if there's no error, then it will just be black for the sake of this. Now that we've been able to validate the form, how about getting the value of the form? I think that is where I think Flutter has made life a bit hard, because as Patrick had suggested, we could use a text editing controller to get the value, or we could also define a form field, a key that will attach to every input, so that we can get the values of that input. So what we're going to use for this example, we're going to use fields. We're going to use field keys. Sorry. So we'll just duplicate this global key. You can just use global keys. You can just duplicate these keys. So we will want one key for each of our inputs, so that we can have a handle on our values in the end when we submit. because currently we can only validate, we can't get the value out of that field. So we may want to use we will name this our name key. Remember that right now we're not dealing with form state, we're dealing with form field state. So this one becomes form field state. So it will handle the state of a field and not at the state of the form. So that will be the difference between the key for the global key for the form and the global key for the name key. We can also attach to every of our inputs. So we have 3 inputs. So we can have here, this one we said is our mailing list, and then this one we said is for terms and conditions. So let's just call it terms key. Now that we have that, we can now attach these keys to the fields for us to be able to extract the value. So in the text form field, we will use the name key so that we get the name from the field. In the other form field for mailing list, we will also attach the key. We will attach the key to the form field so that we can get the form field value. So we'll have the key here, mailing list key. That's okay. Then last, we will use we'll attach also another key here, and we have named it now that's the terms and conditions key. Nope. So that's the terms key. Keys are easier because if you just want to get the state, you can just access the state. If you want to call, say, validate, if you want to say validate this form field only, we can just get the current state of the field and then run validate or run save or any other function that is within that field. So you may want to have to collect our data only if the form is valid. So what we'll do is we'll say if the form field validation goes through, then for our sake right now, we can just print them out. So we'll print the name key. We'll get the current state of the widget. That's what the key will help us do. Then we can say the dot value. Delete this. So we'll do the same for our mailing list. And the same for our terms. So basically, if validation goes through, we will print the value that has the value for each form field. So basically here, submit, validation fails, so we don't have the values. So what we can put here is, let's use my name. For this, we can just set it to true. For this, we can set it to true also. And then we submit. So in the end, we will have the value for each of the fields. So basically, what we've done is we've gone through and made sure that we've been able to achieve the three things we wanted to achieve, because we wanted to have validation being managed by at once for each of the fields. We wanted to save the form. Now we've been able to save. Sorry, we haven't been able to save. So what to do also here is that before we print, we may want to save the form so that it commits the value to in memory. So basically, we will have, this is something that usually so many people forget, and it ends up messing them. So form key dot current state dot save. Now this will save the value even if we on every rebuild, you have to, even if we make a change, even if we go out of the form, we are sure that the form has been saved. So basically, what validate does is that every key has its own validate function. So calling validate on a function on a key will validate that specific uh, value, that specific field. But if you want to validate the whole form, you just call validate on the whole form. Another thing also you have to note is that when you call save on the form, it will call save on each of the fields that is there. So basically, what we've done is we've been able to convert a check field, a checkbox, and a switch. But this applies to anything else you want to change into a field, which, as long as you have any widget that you have control, that has a change, that you have control over it, basically you can get the new value. Then you can just wrap it in a form field and get the value, and put it as part of form input. It's as easy as that. So basically, you can turn anything into a form field, even your own custom widgets that have changing values, for which you can just use the same formula to get the value. Now, the last thing I wanted us to handle is styling. Now, we may want to style our field. Let's say we don't like these lines, the input borders under each of our fields. Let's say for the two fields that we have down here. So that's just as easy as going to our input decoration and changing the input border. So here we have access the terms. So we can say border. So we'll use input border dot none. So if you don't want a border around the input. So for this example, we will see that after doing that, the input border goes away. Or else you can want to get a bit more fancy and have the border go around the input. So here we can just say, for example, so what we use for input borders is, you can say, is an outline input border. So the input border class is the one that handles all the input borders. So it's not the same as a container. Say, okay, that's outline, not, yeah. So if we do that and run our reload a border all around the input. I also don't like the way it looks here, so we'll do the same as we did for the switch, because it looks a bit weird. So just for for our own exercise. We'll wrap this in a row. Then instead of child, we put children. So we'll copy this, our label text. Create a text here in a row. Also, we'll do the same. We want so that our when validation phase, also the color of this custom label will change. So we'll use styling here. Which is of type text type. And then we'll do the same. Let's just even copy this from our field up here so that the color will. So there we have it. We may have introduced an error somewhere. Here. So we'll do the same, just to make sure that we have some space and the form and the checkbox comes to the end. So main axis alignment. Can put space between. So with that, we have our form. I wanted to put a bit more fields, but I see that we don't have enough time. So we could have one input. How about if we want this this styling to appear on all fields at once instead of putting let's say an input border around each one specifically. Now in that case, we can first let's remove this so that it goes to the state it was before. So what we can do is we can go to our material app and set the theme, the form input decoration, our theme for input decoration. So input decoration theme, which is an input decoration theme. And then whatever we apply here will apply to every field within the form. That makes work a bit easier so that you don't have to repeat yourself on when styling each form, on styling each form or each form field within your whole application. So here we can put a border and say outline input border. And then we save our border. So that's where the error is coming from, I think. So now you will see that the input that we put on our theme data applies to the before you put a fill color. So fill color, we can say colors.gray. Let's say 300 and save. Now you will see that putting it in our theme will affect all the other inputs so that we don't have to repeat ourselves. I think for this tutorial that is it. I don't think there's any other thing. So what just to go through, what we did is that we wrap our other kinds of inputs around an input decoration, an input decorator, so that it will give it styling so that it looks like the rest of the form fields. The next thing is that we wrapped the whole thing under a form field so that we can get a grasp of we can manage the state of the input. So this we can do for any other type of input. There are too many kinds of input that we can put, but as long as we just wrap it around a form field, we can be able to handle it as a form as a whole. So as long as we have that, then we'll be able to access the whole form. We can also include, I'd forgotten, we can also include another button here for, let's just put it in a row. So let's wrap this inside a row, and we can create another button for, let's say, reset the form. If we want to reset, we'll have this button. With the child of text, called text. So on pressed, we can say, we can take the form key, get its current state, and then run reset. So remember that the reason why we have access to the form key, we want to run this validation and reset for each of the form fields. Another way of doing it is that if you want to set, if you want to reset only one field at a time, you can also do this using the name key, the key of the field. Say the name field, if you want to reset it. So let's just run that to make sure that it works fast. So a bit of styling to make it look better. So main axis alignment. Main axis of alignment. Let's press between. Sure. Now with that, I think our form looks as good as it's gonna get. Now that so we call reset, it will reset each field. But also, if you want just to reset one, that's the reason why we have keys. We can say call reset on, or even validate. You can validate one at a time, or you can validate as a form. So the form key just gives you a shortcut to call these methods like validate, save, and reset on each one. So it will loop through all the fields and call validate for you or call save for you, depending on the function you want. So say the name key, we can take the name key and put it there and save. So next we'll put, let's say, another name here. So if we call reset for this, it will, now that we've put the key to affect on the reset button to affect only one key, that is what will happen. So in another case, we would want to have it this way. So I think that will be that for this tutorial. I may want to suggest also is it's kind of a shameless plug. So I have a plugin already in the store on pub.dev that works with forms all through. So it will help you make work easy instead of doing all this code just to make one form. This plugin over here is called Flutter Form Builder. it will remove a lot of boilerplate from your code, so that you don't have to write all that code just to achieve the 2 extra fields that you have achieved. So this one is maintained by yours truly. So what we have here is this plugin. It's not actually a plugin, it's a package. This package will provide you with all these kinds of input. So if you have a checkbox, if you have a checkbox list, a choice chip, filter chips, and whatnot, color picker, date picker, and whatnot, all of them, it can do it for you at once. So it's just an easy plugin to make your work easy. Another major thing that it will do, it will put your validation, it will make your validation easy, so that instead of you remember in our code here, for us to validate if the field is empty, or if the length is more than 3, we had to write like a whole function with both validation inputs, with both validation conditions. So here we can't be able to, let's say we have another field down here, let's say for email or whatnot. We are not, if we want to validate it, we'll have to repeat the whole thing again. So what this with what my package that is that does is that it will help you compose validators instead of, so basically if it's required, and there's another validation to be done. Let's say if you want to check if it's a valid email, if it's a valid IP or whatnot. So basically you can just compose them as many as you want. So basically you have validation for a required field, you have validation for, you may want a numeric field to make sure that what the user enters is numeric, or we want to set a minimum and maximum, say, value, so that if you have a field, like let's say for age, and you want the minimum to be 18, you will just put this function, and you'll supply the value that you want to validate. Use a pattern, and it will match. You'll give it a regex pattern, and it will match. It will try to match and make sure that whatever the user has entered will match the pattern that you've provided. Also, you don't have to do that, since we have also an email, a URL, an IP validation, credit card, date. So whatever you want the user to input, you can just compose. So what this package provides is that you will have something like just scroll up here. You will have something like this. If you want age and you want it to be numeric, so it will validate and make sure that the user enters numbers, and it will put if you want to compose another validator that will check that it's actually the maximum is 70, so that's what it'll do. It will also have another advantage where you can be able to transform the field. Let's say for edge that we've been using as our example, it has something called a value transformer, which will transform the value that the user enters. Let's say the user has entered the edge there, but the edge is supposed to be numeric. Your value, your user expects a value, an integer, but the field accepts only strings, because it's a text field anyway. It accepts fields, text string fields, string values. Sorry. So what it will do for it is that it will transform the value before giving you, so that you don't have to change it back now to an integer. So that is also one of the advantages that this package will give you. So it will make your form easy. You don't have to write all this code that we've done. It's good to understand how the form works, but what this package will do is that it will help you eliminate all that boilerplate, so that you can just be able to access. Another thing that it will help you do is that you remember that in the end we had to attach a key to every field that we wanted to collect value from. Instead, what the package does is that it will give you a map of all the values that you put in, so that you can transfer that. Say you can, if you want to put it inside an object, let's say it will give you a map, so that you can just get the object from that map, and get going, instead of having to do all this for every key, because you may have a form that has like 10 fields or 20, whichever amount you want. But if you want it to manage for you, it will make it easier, so that you just get the whole value as a map once, and you forget about it. So I think I have an example here. I think I have an example, sorry, here. I think it's still the same concept that we've been learning anyway. Have not sure if it's load. It's taking a bit of time. But basically, what this does for you is that it will help you manage the form easily, instead of writing too much code. It has so many field inputs. If you want a type ahead, if you want a touch spin, we have it loaded here. Now a form builder will give you easy access to this. It will give you already created forms. We also have access to what we call a form builder will give you this widget that you can use to build your own custom widget. For example, here we've used it to generate a Cupertino. I think it's on GitHub. We can use it to generate any other form any other field that has not been provided by the field or is not provided by Flutter. So basically, if you want to put any random kind of input, you can use it here. So for this example, I think is what you are seeing here. So we use here a custom field, which we will use say Cupertino picker. So here it is not part of the the form field, but you can generate your own. We have a color picker inbuilt. We have chips input built in. We have a date picker, date range. We have all these kinds of input that you can use. Here we have an autocomplete. We have radio buttons. We have this is a segmented control for Cupertino. All these forms you can just be able to generate them. Even a signature, you can just be able to generate them from this package directly. Another advantage it will give you is that conditional validation. If you want to see, if you have like two fields where you have say the password field and confirmation of password, you may want to validate confirmation of password based on the previous password key. So this is what it will give you, conditional validation. So I think you can also compose your own. You can also include your own in part of validators. When you're composing validation for a field, you can also include your own custom instead of just requiring whatever has been put in. So you can check out this package. It will help you a lot. I think that is the end of my presentation. Samuel, I think it's you to end the session now.